Hi, my name is Sandeep Agrawal. I'm an oncologist at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and today I'm going to speak to you about Project Renewal, an initiative of the FDA's Oncology Center of Excellence. I'll give a brief background of efforts to modernize FDA labeling and how it relates to the history of Project Renewal, followed by a review of the process of Project Renewal, the process to evaluate evidence, and challenges and lessons learned. As a background, it will be helpful to review labeling and past efforts to modernize labeling. The FDA label is a compilation of data about a product that contains information necessary for its safe and effective use. Regulations on product labeling have been in effect since 1979. In 2006, the FDA published the Physician's Labeling Rule, or PLR, which amended the requirements for the content and format of product labeling for human prescription drug and biologic products, with the goal to enhance the ability of healthcare providers to access, read, and use the product label. This has been very helpful for drugs approved since 2006. However, many older drugs that were off patent were not in PLR format and had become outdated. In 2013, the FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research initiated a pilot called the Prescription Drug Labeling Improvement and Enhancement Initiative. This program used a contractor to assist the FDA with the many drug labels that needed updating. However, there were several challenges that were encountered. Companies were required to pay a large fee for efficacy supplements, creating a barrier for voluntary updates. There was limited subject matter expertise within the contracting group, and this led to substantial FDA resources needed to fix the label. In 2018, the Oncology Center of Excellence at the FDA established Project Renewal. It's important to note that these efforts I've been discussing to modernize labeling are not mutually exclusive. Each initiative has in common the goal of updating labeling. The PLR and PDIDLI efforts are broader in scope and were not led by the Oncology Center of Excellence, or OCE. Project Renewal is specific to the OCE and oncology drugs. So these are initiatives with a similar intent, but have affected labeling in different ways. So what is Project Renewal? It's a public health initiative led by the OCE to update older oncology drug labels. These are drugs that are off patent, and several have been used to treat cancer for decades. This effort is aligned with the FDA's mission to promote and protect public health, with the goal of providing healthcare providers with the most accurate labeling information to inform prescribing decisions. Under Project Renewal, labeling updates can expand indications if there's substantial evidence, remove outdated information, and also modernize the labels into the Physician Labeling Rule, or PLR format. Learning from these early efforts, Project Renewal hopes to overcome several of the challenges noted with other efforts to update product labeling. There are no longer user fees required for efficacy supplements in many cases, which has removed an important barrier for voluntary label submissions by reference licensed drug holders or the companies. This is not specific to Project Renewal, but has certainly benefited the program by reducing this burden to sponsors. There's close collaboration with the oncology community to obtain the clinical subject matter expertise needed, and this improves the knowledge base and should reduce the timeline and FDA reviewer resources needed. The FDA also plans to work in close collaboration with the companies that are the reference listed drug holders. These companies agree to voluntarily participate in Project Renewal. They may provide additional information used to update labeling, and they'll ultimately submit an application to update their labeling to the FDA. A key point is that we're aiming to reduce the burden for companies that may have little incentive to update these labels. Project Renewal intends to overcome the challenges of outdated labeling by establishing repeatable, objective, and scientific processes for efficient labeling updates. Importantly, we're focused on creating a sound process, one that we can use over and over, making the product label more of a living document. We aim to find added value in the process by creating an opportunity to interact with the oncology community, and this includes providing an educational opportunity for early career scientists and fellows in training to learn more about FDA product labels and regulatory review. It's important to understand what Project Renewal is and what it is not. We are creating a transparent and collaborative process to iteratively improve product labels. It is for off-patent, older oncology drugs, and we will review and potentially update all sections of the label. We need to prioritize, and initially we'll only incorporate high-impact label changes and review a subset of high-priority indications, generally level 1 or A indications across compendia, for example. Project Renewal is not a way to expand indications for drugs that are on patent. It's not a review of all possible indications that may be in use, and it's not in any way related to cost payment or coverage decisions. I do want to reiterate that Project Renewal is intended to update old, long-standing labels for drugs with a large, pre-existing body of literature and history of use. For contemporary drug approvals, we still require data sets during our FDA reviews. In terms of process, a research team that's external to the FDA is formed and consists of oncologists and hematologists, fellows in training, labeling experts, and other subject matter experts. A process dubbed the Labeling Evidence Evaluation Process, or LEAP, is used to evaluate and discuss available evidence based on an initial literature search. Multiple meetings are held with the research team and the FDA to discuss proposed new indications, updating of outdated information, and other labeling considerations. The end product of this part of the process is a draft version of the updated label and a report called a product report with recommendations from the research team that are then submitted to the FDA for review. So here, in phase 1, we see literatures identified and evaluated with selected off-label uses. Then, during these LEAP meetings in phase 2, we discuss the clinical use and evidence to support potential labeling updates with the experts. These are practicing oncologists at large research institutions, including fellows in training. After these meetings, a summary report and draft label are created by the research team for FDA review. At the FDA, we do our own evaluation based on the reports provided. We create a summary and then eventually send this along to the reference listed drug holder for the drug. It's important to note that even though the research team is very valuable in this process, the FDA must still do their own due diligence and review the data to ensure it meets regulatory requirements. The sponsor then reviews the labeling suggestions and our accompanying scientific rationale and formally submits the labeling request to the FDA to update the label. So updating product labels involves more than just the indications. We often have limited information on the initial approval of a drug or biologic. As we learn more in the post-marketing setting, there are many aspects of a drug product that can be updated, which includes new uses, doses, administration schedules, safety findings leading to warning and precautions, drug-drug interactions, etc. The Project Renewal Labeling Evidence Evaluation process reviews publicly available data to make changes to the label that are considered high impact and the most relevant. Not everything known about the drug can be put in the label, and part of the challenge is filtering out interesting but not necessary information, or information that does not have adequate data to support its inclusion. As an example, drug X was approved in the 1970s and currently has 4 indications in its label, all for oncology uses. Over the 50 years after its initial approval, many important studies came out, and in the present day, drug X is recommended for use in more than 20 tumor types by compendia and professional guidelines, even though it's only FDA approved in 4 of these. These greater than 20 potential indications are reviewed through the evidence evaluation process I outlined earlier. After review, 12 indications appear to be supported by adequate and well-controlled trials. Dosages, new warnings for safety, and updates to drug-drug interactions are made based on currently available information after literature review. This is an example of a particularly outdated label, but serves as an example of where we're trying to move and why. And it's not only about adding new information that's required for a contemporary product label. Changes in science and our understanding of a drug may also lead to removing outdated information. An example of this was the removal of an old boxed warning that stated, "It is recommended that drug X is given only by or under the supervision of a qualified physician who is experienced in cancer chemotherapy and who is well-versed in the use of potent anti-metabolites." With the advent of modern oncology and the role of the trained oncologist, this warning appears outdated, no longer relevant, and can be removed. So how do we evaluate the evidence for these changes? Drugs are approved based on substantial evidence of effectiveness in the context of acceptable safety. Substantial evidence is not one particular finding, but an overall evaluation of multiple elements that we use. For instance, what is the quantity of evidence? How many patients were in the trial or trials to support use? How many clinical trials have been done? What is the quality of the individual clinical trial? Is it adequate and well controlled? How certain are we of the results? Is it statistically persuasive? Even if we are sure there's a difference, is the magnitude of difference large and clinically meaningful? What is the source of the evidence? Are we looking at subject-level data from a commercial clinical trial or a report in the published literature? And finally, in what context are we placing this evidence? How rare is the disease? What is the unmet need? And how much experience with the safety and efficacy of this product do we have across diseases? In further evaluating quality, reports of adequate and well-controlled investigations provide the primary basis for determining whether there is substantial evidence to support the claims of effectiveness for new drugs. Some of the critical components in considering quality include a clear statement of objectives with a pre-specified analysis, a design of the trial that allows for a valid comparison to a control, subjects that are verified to have the disease under study, minimizing bias in treatment assignment, minimizing bias for subjects, observers, and data analysis through blinding or use of objective endpoints, and use of well-defined and reliable assessments. As I mentioned, Project Renewal will largely use published literature. Some of the considerations we have had to include are how detailed the publication is with respect to documenting the various trial design and conduct issues. Other questions we pose are, who conducted the study? How detailed is the published report? How objective are the outcomes? Again, was the analysis pre-specified? Are results persuasive? And is there internal consistency among secondary trial outcomes? We also look at the quantity of the data and whether there are multiple studies that are supportive. A key question is, does the published report provide enough detail to be considered substantial evidence from an adequate and well-controlled trial? I also want to touch on the role of guidelines and compendia in Project Renewal and in updating these labels. Professional guidelines and compendia help prioritize which uses to evaluate further. These resources are a summary of the evidence, but are not the evidence itself. Compendia for off-label oncology indications are not definitive. Others outside of the FDA have evaluated the use of compendia for evaluating off-label oncology indications and found that they can lack transparency in the evidence evaluation process. They may cite little current evidence and often lack systematic methods to review or update evidence. So even though professional guidelines and compendia help prioritize which uses to evaluate further, they do have limitations that should be considered. And at the end of the day, the FDA must do its own review of the evidence. When comparing Project Renewal to contemporary FDA reviews for drugs, there are a few limitations and strengths to note. In Project Renewal, we are reviewing reports of the studies rather than the actual data. Older studies had different standards for data reporting, so some of the information may not be included, and analysis methods themselves may not be clear or available. We may also not have a single high-quality, adequate, and well-controlled trial to rely on, and instead use a number of different trials and available data from several studies. For strengths, we do have years of experience with the use of these drugs, and their safety is generally known and well characterized. We often have multiple trials available to corroborate findings. So where data quality may be lacking, the quantity of data and experience can mitigate some of the uncertainties and support use of these drugs. So we place all of these elements in the context of the disease, treatment, and in some cases, the temporal context. Different contexts allow for different levels of flexibility and regulatory risk. Disease context is important. For the most part, we deal with severe and life-threatening diseases in cancer, which allow us to exert more flexibility than perhaps other therapeutic areas. And many of these diseases can be rare. The therapeutic context is important. We must consider other available therapies or if there's a large unmet need. A particularly important aspect of context to Project Renewal and older off-patent drugs is the temporal context of the drug and the published literature we will review. The context for review of these off-patent, long-standing chemotherapies is quite different than contemporary efficacy supplements with respect to the amount of knowledge we already have for these therapies, the fact that we will need to rely heavily on the published literature, and the reality that some of the data will be from older studies conducted in a different scientific era. Some challenges we faced in this project include being dependent on the voluntary participation of sponsors. The evidence used to support proposed labeling updates were generated in a different historical era with different standards. And allocating FDA resources is also a big challenge. This has been a resource-intensive process. We've learned several lessons along the way. Reducing burden to companies is important to enable voluntary participation, given that these companies may lack incentive to update these labels otherwise. Though evidence was often generated with different historical standards, the context and quantity of the studies we have can mitigate some of our concerns. In dealing with allocation of FDA resources, we are certainly generating process efficiencies as we gain experience in this initiative. And we've also learned that this is a great opportunity for successful engagement efforts with various stakeholders, and has proven to be a useful tool in education, both in the education of the FDA and also for those outside of the FDA on regulatory considerations. In summary, Project Renewal is a public health initiative to update the labeling of older oncology drugs. The purpose is to allow for safe and effective use of these products. This is an iterative process with a goal to make the project sustainable over the long term. And as it relates to drug repurposing, it's important to consider how much is known about the drug, the available safety information, and available data and whether data sets would be needed. I hope this has been helpful in providing an example of efforts that, though not exactly drug repurposing, certainly share similar characteristics and goals. I want to thank the Project Renewal team at the FDA, as well as OCE leadership, CPATH, and everyone else here today for inviting us to speak and for participating in this important meeting. Thank you.